this was done with absolute steely-eyed determination and a foreknowledge, and that's why, as a first mention, I don't know if we'll get to it. I don't know if we need to get to it, but it was 4 years between the time that I first met Chris, and in those days, Four Horsemen was just really coming off the ground, and that it was a 4-year journey, and about 2.5 to 3 years from the first time I approached you at Congruence, was it? Congregate. That's it. Right. Yep. So this didn't happen quickly, and there's reasons for that, which may or may not translate into something that you're interested in, but hopefully we can get to that in the questions. So, Chris, why don't you start by introducing yourself as if you need an introduction?
I imagine there are plenty of people that don't know who I am. I'm Chris Kennedy. I'm a former naval aviator, now science fiction, fantasy author, editor, publisher. I run Chris Kennedy Publishing, which has about 7 imprints and sells lots of books.
My name is Chuck Gannon. For my sins, I had to leave. No, I was born a Catholic, so I immediately go into confession mode. And since I know what goes on in my mind, I'll say it again. For my sins, I was in a career in traditional publishing, because traditional publishing was all there was from about 1990 to 92, 93. And I was about to get my first book contract, and I was about to leave television, production, and writing. And essentially what happened is all those things went sideways on me, higher up the tree. So for my sins, I found myself in academia from 95 to 2007. Came out, restarted, got my dream gig, which was to be publishing books with Bain Books. Simply because if you take a look in traditional publishing, you need to look, if you're going there and you write series, and one of the things that I've noticed about indie authors is you understand the benefit of the series in so many ways, and I think are going to prove to have been way ahead of the curve when the amalgamation of all these different sort of publishing schemes are sort of blend into whatever they're going to blend into in the coming years and decades. But the bottom line is, if a publisher has their own money in the game, they will tend to play singles and doubles baseball. They do not look for the home run. The big traditional publishing houses are looking for the big home runs. What they spend on posters alone in what they used to do in the Javits Center in New York, the EA, Book Expo America, was just amazing. I mean, I've never seen flags that big. So it's there's a lot of money, but they don't necessarily spend it on you. So the point is that if a house has their own money, they will tend to keep a series alive until it really shows that it's the bigger companies are answering to higher economic powers, and they generally don't have the freedom to do so. So you'll see how that becomes very important in this. I think probably the best thing to do, and so I write now for Bain. The Kane Riordan series is a bunch of Nebula nominations, won an award, blah blah blah. So I'm coming from
kind of doing okay.
Yeah. Well, okay. You can always do better. So I'm coming from the traditional publishing side, but like you heard me say, and there was reason for it, TV, and doing it as a freelancer. So entrepreneurial thought was near and dear to me, and thinking about media as cross-platform opportunities. There's stuff happening right now that I said in the 1980s. One day, and for once, the science fiction writer was right. Anyhow, but let's I'll let Chris tell the tale of how this sort of arrived in his horizon, so to speak.
Okay, so as I mentioned, I publish science fiction and fantasy. One of the things that our company does a lot of is go to science fiction and fantasy conventions to meet the readers and generate sales that way. I actually have three of the authors from CKP sitting in the front row here. And turn around, wave.
We didn't bring these.
Brand, wave your
Yes.
hat, Bill, wave your hat.
We got the Kevins on the bookends and Bill Wack in the middle. So there I was at Congregate, which is a science fiction fantasy convention in High Point, North Carolina. And he comes up to me and he says, "Hey, let me run something by you." "Sure, Chuck, run something by me." He says, "So you know I've got this series with Bain." "Yes, I'm passingly familiar that you write for Bain, yes." He says, "Well, you know, I've got this idea." And anybody that knows Chuck knows that he's an idea man. He's a thinking man.
I have a theory about that.
Yes.
You do.
He's actually one of the smartest people I know, because he does.
You don't know
ask
many people
questions.
that I guess.
Yeah, chaff flares, yeah. Anyway,
I got it.
he comes up and says, "Hey, you know, so I have this idea, but it's for the series, but it's something that is a little bit smaller, and it's going to take a little more agility than what a traditional publisher can do." And I said, "Okay, tell me more." And he said, "Well, it's going to be directly linked to the series that Big Trad Pub is publishing, but I'm looking for somebody to do it that can do it quicker, faster, and in a way that hasn't ever really been done before." "Okay, I'm interested. Tell me more." He says, "Okay, what I want to do," and he explains the concept, and he says, "You know, so what I want to do is launch a series of novellas, and written by different authors, and then we'll have a combined book that puts it all together. And I'll add a bunch of my own words and you know, to link the stories, and we'll mash them all in, and you know, because they're all kind of going on at the same time, so then they have to be fit together." And I said, "All right, I think that sounds good. Yes, I can do that." Because we had done that a couple times, not exactly that, but we had done some novellas that then turned into books before. "Okay, I can do that." You know, this was a scale that was a little bit bigger than a single author, you know, who was writing basically a Kindle Vella sort of thing. Here's a chapter, here's a chapter, here's a chapter, here's a chapter, you know, and then you book it, you know, put them all into a book together. That's easy. This was a little bit harder, but it certainly was something we could do, and it kind of crossed the boundaries of indie versus trad, because there's a big trad pub audience for his books, and I've got an indie audience for the science fiction and fantasy that we do, and it seemed, to us anyway, that we could bring them together. It's one of those 1,000 points of light. Got them over here, got them over here, got to get them together. Wouldn't be group at this juncture. We didn't get them together. So we did.
Okay, Huey Long. The power of, I don't know whether it was the pitch or I think the thing that really did it is the Chris and I knew each other and liked each other pretty much from the get-go. I had one or two things.
I'm Catholic too, and I feel the same way.
Oh my word. But at any rate, I think, and it's a word I'm going to come back to a lot in this, which is trust. And I trusted Chris. I knew Chris was a straight up guy, and I'd seen the way he acted with people, and I'd seen that he was also largely unflappable, which is a thing you really want in a partner for this sort of venture, because when you go into uncharted territory, you can be sure that there are going to be times when you get together and you go, "Let's go that way." So knowing that that's in the offing, choosing the right person, booknote that right away, because you're obviously what we're talking about here to bring it to you is you're thinking about collaborative ventures. You're thinking about, what if I wanted to get my foot in trad, or if you're in trad, what if I wanted to make use of the indie options and the indie possibilities out there. And I would say the most important, the first and the last thing you need to consider more than anything else is, can you can you rely on the person? And by I say trust, I don't mean simply that they're not going to take advantage of you. Man, you really ought to believe that. But if you can't believe that, you shouldn't be doing it until you find the person that you do feel that about to begin with. But the other thing is that you have to trust that not only are they going to be fair, but they've got your back, and that they're going to be as invested in the success of the enterprise as you are. Because if there's inequity in that, that's going to show up too. And so this was one of the reasons it took me. I've been looking to do something like this. My history goes back to, so the second novel was, the first 4 of the 5 novels in the series, the main arc series, have been nominated for Nebulas. It was the second novel. I was at a convention, and a bunch of people approached me and they said, when are you going to open up your Sandbox? It's kind of cool. And I said, well, okay, I'll think about that. So what I did was a Kickstarter, which was another one of those educations for my sins. It actually was very successful. It hit goal. It hit 2 stretch goals. And what came out of that was an anthology called Lost Signals. Lost Signals was pointedly called that because the entire idea is, in this anthology, these are the stories that were not told. They were lost in the rush of the main action. In other words, in opera, space opera, same thing, there's all the major players on stage. But I think one of the things that Lucasfilm has been very smart about in Disney is that they've actually started exploiting the untold or the peripheral stories, and they're making a huge book there. Now, whether or not I was going to make a huge book, I wanted to give each one of these, everybody who was nice enough to come and play, I wanted to give them their own zone to operate in. I wanted, and they pitched it, we got the money for it, we published it, and out of that actually came 3 of the people who now are working in Murphy's Laws, which is the series we're talking about here. And so the bottom line was I had seen that it could be done, I knew there was interest in it, and then I started looking around, and I tell you, it's tough. It was very tough, and I passed on a bunch of offers from people who I know very well, who I like, I've worked with, I collaborate with, they're dear friends, but I looked at it, and I looked at the enterprise, and I said, I don't think so. This was right. This was the right guy, and what he was doing, I felt, was very much the right sort of fit for this. So that aspect was really important.
And from my side, I knew I could trust Chuck. The trust went both ways. We weren't besties, but I'd been around him enough that I knew him, and I talked with him a couple times about different other things. And he always came across to me as very genuine and very honest. You knew that when he answered something, he was going to give you the straight shot. He might try and temper it a little to not offend your sensibility because he's a good guy.
Which would add the second hour of my answer.
Yeah. You have a theory about that too. So I knew I could trust him, and this was a project that, when we began to take on, I knew that he would bring everything that he was doing to make it successful too, which you will see later on. There were some times where you got to the rough parts, but he always was there to do the right things and the things that he had promised, which ultimately was why I said yes in the first place.
So now that the Mutual Admiration Society has adjourned, at least briefly, I think probably a couple of things that might be useful for you if you're thinking about this. Obviously, choosing the right person with the right kind of model. I'm going to say that from my perspective, one of the first things we talked about was the difference. One of the great challenges in this is there's a difference not only between indie and traditional authors. In my experience, there's a difference between indie and traditional primary readers. And I'll throw out and there are many differences, but I was thinking about this presentation and I wanted to boil it down to one thing, a takeaway, without something so simple that a PowerPoint was not required. And it's what I'm going to call the linger to devour spectrum. Indie readers tend to devour books. they buy lots of them, they buy them fast, then traditional publishers tend to be more lingerers. Readers tend to be more lingerers. They're looking for a depth in the work. They're looking, something that's going to reward the second and third read. Not all of them, but a lot of them. So and those things bring with them different kind of writing styles. So one of the first things that
Well, and not only that, but indie authors, indie readers, very ebook focused. TradPub very print focused, and so we're bringing together not only indie versus trad, but also different reading styles, different ways of consuming, and he has the series with Bain, and it has a very, all the books are formatted the same way. So what we produced had to look like the TradPub one, because if it doesn't look, smell, pass the taste test, then the TradPub readers, who were very particular about this is what it should look like, and if it doesn't look like that, then it's not part of the series really, and maybe I don't care.
And so this linger to devour thing has other things connected to it. For instance, for an indie author, the notion of going to a signing, you probably have to specially do a print run that's going to be fairly expensive to you just to make use of that venue. That's presumed. As a matter of fact, most, at least half of the readers, and certainly what I would call the sort of the diehard readers, there's that core audience that you could write menus from things set in your world, and they would buy them up so they could argue the relative canonical rectitude of them. I almost said rectumtude, and I'm not sure I would have been wrong, but that one took a little while. The room died. Why? Oh, Chuck's in it. That's why it died. Yeah, right. So, sparing you this, the thing is that those core readers are actually, they want books. They want you to autograph the books. You can, if you're the sort of mercenary individual who will do this, I will never charge for an autograph, or to personalize it. And there's a simple reason. You're doing me the great honor of making it possible for me to live the dream I had since I was 12 years old. If I could go to your house and not be stalkery about it, I'd give you the book. But that's, so it's very, very different mentalities going in. And that then turns into, and it's one of the things that I think we both knew going in conceptually, but the details of it were, it means that readers who come, or writers that come from TradPub have dealt with not an entirely different, there is overlap, but there's some huge differences in terms of, one of the things that Chris was saying that I think was perhaps new to him was when he was working with David Weber, and he was talking about the number of times you get they used to be called galleys and blues, but essentially, you're getting the hopefully camera ready copy, as they used to call it, and you go over that stuff 14 or 15 times. Some of it is developmental edit, some of it is copy edit, then there's the proofreading, et cetera, et cetera. The amount of detail and exactitude that is required in all regards. But so by the way, this is not me about to launch into, and this is why TradPub is better. There is no better. There's different. And our challenge was, how do you manage to minimize the challenges?
Right. So he comes from a perspective of, okay, well, we've got the story. It needs to be edited. Then it needs to be edited. Then it needs to be edited. And I'm like, I don't have time for all that shit. I need to get it out the door. We got a schedule to maintain here. How are we going to do one a month if we're sitting here spending 6 months on this one book? It can't be done. No. So he's used to a pace. I'm used to pace. And there was some learning, and we both knew that it was going to be a little different for both of us, but sometimes the amount of how it was different was not, was more, and it makes people uncomfortable, when he's going too slow, I'm uncomfortable. But then I race ahead and he's uncomfortable because, oh my God, we haven't done this. I haven't had a chance to send it out to my proofreaders. I haven't had, and so it's finding a happy medium where you're both only a little uncomfortable.
And you trust each other.
Yeah,
This is
and
the
that's
whole thing.
why if there was no trust.
This would have broken down a lot. But the thing is that when you surmount the obstacles, and you will, I absolutely believe that the media themselves, forgive the television guy here, but the media themselves don't preclude you from doing anything. By which I mean, if you can imagine it, you can probably do it. There's something axiomatic in here later on, and it's something that I think the late like Mike Resnick said. He said, and he may have been quoting somebody else, you can do anything if you have love, money, and time. You can do anything if you have infinite resources of at least two of those things. And we had love and time. And I would say that if you feel that you've got, that's one of the reasons that if you don't have a lot of money to throw at something, if you want this to be a cash cow, to be cash positive, from pretty much the get-go, you've got to have essentially limitless reservoirs of time, because it's going to take some time, and the love or trust, as the case may be. Love for the project, trust for the other person. We wouldn't be sitting here talking about this if we hadn't had that.
One of us would be dead.
Yeah, it could be two, depending on how we did it.
Yeah.
So this all got into how was this series going to be different? And I think the thing the pitch, even with people who know each other, can be key. And there's somebody else in the audience who heard the same pitch, I know. And it was, well, so the Cane Reorder series is it's a lot of action, a lot of intrigue. Also, as the series goes on, leavening in big ideas, quote, big. But I felt that wasn't going to that was not the best plane to try to fly for what was initially going to be more of an indie audience, because it was coming out through him, right? So the bottom line is, I said, okay, we need something, he knew I knew this, because I said, well, what if it's like Band of Brothers meets Kelly's Heroes? So for those of you who know the movies, this is very soulful stuff with screw-ups and screwballs, and somehow making that work into something that's both serious, fast-moving, ripping, a little bit more, the term used to be ripping yarns, sort of style. And it is different, and we knew we'd be looking at indie readers first, because we're going out under his banner. But I think it worked out really well that we then gave it its own imprint. He gave it. It's not a we. It's his shop. No one. The bottom line is if it comes to indie side, I just sit and learn and nod. Because
it was easy to give it its own imprint. As a publisher, what are imprints? Well, they're the things that publishers use to group books. Typically, the big houses, they'll have one for sci-fi, one for fantasy, one for whatever, and then maybe smaller ones to kind of sub-differentiate, the space opera from the mill sci-fi, or something along those lines. And this was different enough that I wanted to be able to give it its own home, where readers could come and find it, and they knew, okay, this is Beyond Terra, which is kind of part of the thing, is Beyond Terra Press is going to be the home for it. And I actually said, Chuck, I'm going to start a new imprint. What would you like? And he went through a couple, and well, what about this? What about this? How about Beyond Terra? Yeah, I like that.
And it's the Terran Republic series in its largest incarnation, I guess you could say. So there was, once again, brand echo. Some of the things that I thought might be, there are so many things that we could talk about, but the thing that I'm most interested in here is getting to things like, for instance, I'll let Chris be the one to talk about the pricing. You heard about the novellas, and there were two things that were concerns there. One which was how did we get velocity? And now you're dealing with more than half of the stable of writers are trad pub writers. And the other half are proven indie writers. Guess what none of them have? Time. So, remember that time? Yeah, so what's the thing? Well, then you need to be able to somehow build this on shorter platforms. So they say, well, when they know when we come and say it's a new season, that they're looking at maybe a 30,000 word commitment, not 100, not 120. They also know that it's going to hit the market right away. And for traditional pub writers, a lot of the folks we got had only been working in collaboration. So a major appeal was their name was the only name on the novella. For I think all the traditional publishing people in there, it was the first one they ever had. And it sits proudly on their shelves. They're understanding what works, what is appealing to an indie author and a trad pub author means you have to actually become educated in both realms. That's where time comes in, because it's going to take you time. You're going to have to become conversant, not expert. Trust is what you need to have for the expert who knows all the stuff that you have at best familiarity with. So for me, that was one of the notions about why we keep it short. But there were also pricing concerns.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and for those of you that have books out on Amazon, you know, there's this thing called Kindle Unlimited, and in science fiction, nearly all of the books, you know, are in Kindle Unlimited. There's a huge number of readers. The very voracious readers in sci-fi are in the Kindle Unlimited program. So typically, for me, about 2/3 of the royalty income that I receive as a publisher are from page reads in Kindle Unlimited. So we needed it to be in Kindle Unlimited to be so that our readers would follow us, you know, among other things. We needed it to be where the readers of our series are. And you know, I looked the other day, and you know, alien invasion in science fiction, that category, 39 of the top 40 books are in Kindle Unlimited. So you know, that tells you something. So we wanted it to be in Kindle Unlimited. However, for it to be in KU, it has to be priced between $2.99 and $9.99. And $2.99 is probably on the high side for a you know, 30K novella. But if we didn't, then we'd lose out on the readers, and we wouldn't just lose out on the KU page reads, which is about 2/3 of the income. You know, it got harder and harder. You know, okay, well, if we made it $1.99, then you know, now we're yeah, boo, yeah. So we went with $2.99 and said, hey, sorry, this is blame Amazon. It's not our fault. But then it was available to all of the Kindle Unlimited readers, and you know, just like the other series, about 2/3 of the royalty income came from that. But you'll remember that there are two different sets of readers that we're bringing in. We're bringing in the indie readers who jump in and get all of the page reads and the ebook copies. And then as time goes by, the trad pub people come in. And they're less into the page reads. Some still were, but then you start seeing the print books start to sell. And so it actually gave a little bit more longevity to the sales than what you typically see for, you know, just a sci-fi ebook, you know, that I publish. You know, you see the up and down, but here it kind of went up and then it went, whoa, a little bit slower. Yeah.
Can I ask, are the print books, were they the novellas themselves, or did you package novellas together? Because
Yes.
I assume that
Yes, they were, both.
Okay,
As we went along, the books came out in novella.
Yep.
If you come to the book signing on Friday, I'll have some of the novellas there, and you can see what they look like versus, you know, I didn't bring any of the combined novel because it's 150K or 200. I
Oh,
don't
no, the first
Yeah, the
season
first one
was
is-
210.
Yeah, it's a door stopper.
Did you do offset or just all POD?
LPOD. So yes, there were the novellas as we went along, and then there was a little bit of gap between the final novella in the first season, which was mine, and then the full, combined book. And it was good to have that, so that the people that were reading through the series could get to the sixth one before the combined book came out, and everybody went, oh, well, why do I want to read the fifth and sixth one when I can just jump to the full book? Which, as the author of the sixth one, was kind of important to me. I'd like to get my part of the,
And-
I wrote the 30K book too. I want my piece of the pie.
And it was one of the reasons why it was a discovery thing. We really didn't think that there was going to be, because we thought that we were being very, very open and constantly saying there isn't, these things will be gathered and there will be extra content. The trust in the extra content was, I'll believe it when I see it, evidently. But then in addition, one of the other things that we've asked all the authors to do is after they do their 30K, give us another 1 or 2K that expands something in your novella so that there really is significant value added that really tells a bigger, more fleshed out tale when it comes out in novel form. The other thing about pricing had to do, that I was actually thinking, because it was one of those moments when I said this, it was funny. We came up with the same percentage breakdown. To the like 1 or 2% split, because one of the other reasons for the novellas was we knew, first of all, how do you get something to come out 6 times a year? Well, you'd better have 6 products. In order to do that, they're going to have to be shorter, because none of these people can afford to do this, to do more than 30K. But it also meant that they would have to make the bare share of their money, follow me on this one, is that when their novella comes out, it's the IP holder, me, it's the publisher, and then it's them. Now, one of the things that Chris and I sat down, but then there's the novel, right? Now the novel's gonna break down IP holder, publisher, and then pro rata, the 6 people in. I took myself out of the mix. I don't get paid for the words that I get. I'm always getting the IP hit, and I'm just pleased to have people there. But the bottom line is, you can't see as much, the individual authors are not gonna see as much of the novel. So the novella was important to give them the incentive, the cash incentive that was really, what is it? It's 50%, I think, for
Yeah, I think so.
And we were absolutely determined, which means that we were both taking what by industry standards would be a cut to make
I
sure
think it was
that.
50, 35, 15.
Yeah, something like that, yeah. And then my piece and his piece came up in the novel, and the pro rata was it was still out there. But this was, so there were many pricings concerned, and you'll notice that one of the things that lies behind all this is a concern with authors, which was really easy for me, because that's sort of when you're in trad pub, you're frequently getting ridden under the bus. You don't make the decisions, right? You get a contract, you get the best thing that can be negotiated, and you say yes or no. That's it. And if it's no, then when are you going to be working again? I don't know. So all of these sort of things were there. And before we go to questions, there are a couple of axiomatic lines I want to suggest as things to think about. To the authors, only one person can drive the bus, and it ain't you. It's the publisher. And as a matter of fact, if you can get the publisher to say, no, you can drive the bus, or we'll drive the bus together, that publisher hasn't thought this through just yet. So and that's important. And there are going to be authors out there who are going to, if you're dealing with an author who cannot essentially say, I'm going to be, I'm going to be the second pill in the final analysis. But you're then with a good publisher who says, yeah, okay, I'm first among peers, but we're peers. And when the author is bringing brand recognition, the bottom line is you're tied together at the hip, because what the author hopefully brings is an understanding of their brand, what made it work, what makes it tick, And certainly the first audience, and now if you're expanding the audience, what's that they have enough of a sense and enough of trust of the publisher to say, yeah, and this is how we're going to play with that, to then work it out. You are in this together. There is no way, it's like one of those buddy movies where two people escape a chain gang, chained together. It's one of those movies. Hopefully with a little more joy in there. The other thing, also ask yourself, can you play well in somebody else's sandbox? That's really important. That's going to be really important.
Are you going to treat it well, or are you going to be the cat that comes into the sandbox
Yeah.
Leaves the prison.
and leaves the president?
Yep. And publishers, are you willing?
You're the president.
This is the really weird thing, because then if you think about IPs, so here's the publisher side of this thing. Are you willing to drive a bus you don't own? Because that's really what's going on. He can, I can say this because it's the sort of thing, it's like I can talk about what it would be like to divorce my wife because we know we never will. It's that sort of comfort. But the thing is, he could immediately press the nuclear button on this, right? You could say, I'm stop publishing this. I got a button too. It's called my IP. I go home. But the bottom line is, if you're thinking that way, if you are thinking that way when you get into it, don't get into it. That means you don't have the trust. And that is your surefire thing that it doesn't mean the idea is dead, but it means, well, it was nice dating you, but we ain't getting married. And that's one of the things I would recommend. Be willing to be wrong, even, perhaps particularly in your own area of expertise. And the reason for that is nothing that comes out of this sort of hybridization is going to be exactly what you're used to. A lot of it, you're going to have your areas of expertise, but if you're not open to thinking, wow, this really changes my job, and it changes my expertise, I got to learn something new. If you can't do that, this may not be for you. And clearly marking and understanding what those respective areas of expertise are, including the zone of the undiscovered country, is really important, because that's first of all, it's going to tell you what your jobs are. And it's also going to tell you where you're going to have to wind up doing probably the most, I wouldn't even call it negotiation. It's sort of like joint exploration to find the best path through.
And then the same thing goes for the authors that you bring into this.
Yep.
Because, like Chuck said, half were trad pub, half were indie, but the process was neither. The process was somewhere in between, and they had to adapt too. So when you're bringing in people that it's a new beast, and we're not doing it exactly like this, we're not doing it exactly like that, and there was some growing pains for the authors too. But happily we had good folks, and they worked through it, and they're the ones that were part of it are giggling up here.
I'm giggling too, deep inside.
But so it's different for everybody, and you have to be aware, certainly from the publisher's perspective, I probably needed to be a little more upfront with them about, okay, here's how it's gonna work, but I didn't really understand how it was gonna work until we got part of the way into it, and by then, Kevin Eikenberry had the fortune or misfortune of being number 2 out of the 6, and so he had to be probably, as adaptable, the number 1 guy, he was all over the place. We were all over the place with him, trying to get it, figured out how things were gonna exactly work. Meanwhile, as the deadline that we had put for the release date was marching toward us, and then it's got the follow-on effects for, okay, well, if we do this to number 1, there's a trickle-down effect for 5 other people, and how do we make that all work? So, it took a little bit to get the process in, and I think that we're still working on process,
Oh.
and we're, by the 3rd season, we're gonna have this really locked in. Until something else changes.
And so a couple of things. Are you in this for the money? Well, you're probably succeeding if you're making money at it. That's a good thing. Don't expect that it's going to be, you might get lucky really fast, really big, but there's a lot of things that says that this is slow burn. But it's been really interesting watching the loyalty to the series grow. It has not, and I kind of prefer that because very often, big initial means big fall, can mean big fall or big dropout. But think of this in terms of value added for your brand authors, because it really is. You are reaching a whole other audience, and the tendency for them to, what I found really interesting and comforting in a lot of ways, it became very obvious how that people were paying, indie readers were paying more than what they thought their price point was going to be for something like this loyally, and are now apparently addicted, judging from the feedback that we get. And we are still working the process. Second season was different. We realized we don't do 6 and bind 1. We do 3, bind the 3, come out with a novel. We do the next 3, bind those 3, come out with a novel. So that actually gave more activity, and it doubled the number because, and it's hard to tease the numbers out. It looks like the novel, the print novel, the novel sells a fair amount of print. I think it looks to me, at any rate, we went back and forth on this. It's like, what does it mean? But my suspicion is the legacy readers are wanting to put these things on the shelf. So,
And they want them to look like the ones that are already on the shelf. So it was important to get that top typography from Bain. Hey Bain, we want to make these books look like yours. Can you tell us everything you've done? What? You want what? We want all of the typography so that we can, really? What are you gonna do with it? I'm gonna make my books look like your books. Oh. All right, that makes sense. Because ultimately, if ours look like theirs, then that's gonna help sell theirs. And people are it's gonna be a new entry
bringing them
point.
new audience.
Right. And happily, they were smart enough to see it. Tony's pretty darn smart.
Yeah,
For
she was
those-
also the second person I spoke to.
Yeah. Well, that was the first thing that I said when he brought this to me. You know, he's like, hey, I've got this thing and we're gonna do this thing, and does Tony know? And does Tony approve? You know.
And that was already on my calendar.
Yeah.
So with what seconds we have left, any questions? Yeah.
Do you write space opera, which happens to be a high-selling genre, or do you make an analysis prior to that and you figure out which was the genre that you wanted to get into because of sales?
For me? Oh, no.
Both of you, I guess.
Well, for me, this was what I always knew I wanted to write.
Okay, so that was.
Yeah,
He writes hard sci-fi. I mean, you break your teeth off on it. It's hard sci-fi.
And could I have an answer for you too, what you think? Should people get into a genre because it sells, or should they write what they like?
You should write what you like. My personal feeling, you write what you like because it comes across in how you write. If you have joy in writing, the reader will know and will have joy in reading. If you're just going through the motions,
Yep. Yeah.
it ain't there.
And watch out for trying to surf that next wave, because if the wave is already big enough that there are people with boards on it, you're probably going to be you're going to be asking yourself, why did I do this? Find what you're good at, find what you love. Those avocation, occupation, make them the same thing, and generally the market will find you.
Ma'am?
How do you share your world-building Bible with everybody involved in the project?
Talking about goat chokers, you keep it all together, and you keep notes, and then you send it out, and believe me, they got a huge amount, and that was heavily winnowed down.
He wasn't kidding.
I'm not
when
kidding, it's like this.
I had he's like, hey, here's everything you need to know about the universe. But we didn't really need to know everything about the universe. And the first couple people that had to go through all of that had a pretty big job ahead of them.
Yeah.
By the time it got to me as number 6, I had skimmed through the stuff that was important, but I had also read, novella 1, novella 2, novella 3, novella 4, and I just had to make it match. While, there were still some things, okay, well, hey, what about this? Hey, what about that? But, I had a concept already of what the world was and our place in it.
So a couple of things. If you're going to do that, you need to actually break it down into sections, which I did. The other thing is, you may run into what Chris just said, which is like, there's a lot of stuff here we don't need. if you know what the arc is ahead of time for the series, the bottom line is you are left with a choice. Do I do 1 plus updates? Or do I put it all there so this reference is always there and somebody says, wait a minute, does this actually kind of relates to that? I chose the former for one reason more than any. Think of it this way, if you're doing all the work to bring all the stuff together, and then you're gonna think about, now I'm gonna have to figure out what is needed when, how I'm gonna put it out, blah, blah, blah. Or since you're already there, you've done all the work, put it together, know that a lot of it isn't gonna be used. And I didn't tell people read it cover to cover. I said, this is a resource. It's essentially a reference work. The stuff that's going to be immediately important, others that aren't. And I would commend for those of you who are coming into this and have time concerns, so that's pretty much all of you, you might as well get it all out there at first, as long as you make it clear, and I tried to, but I don't think I succeeded. You are not, there will not be a test.
We're done.
We're done, but I don't know if you have time, I got 15